Hiya! Hiya!
Hey, Peter and Kapil, welcome to the Guild.
Hey,
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having us.
Great to
great to
have
be
you.
back.
Yeah, great to see you again, Peter. As I said, I first met you on my podcast. I know you've done a lot of awesome things with karate. I think today we're going to start off with the demo just to get people really excited, I believe. But anything you want to do or say, let us know. And the floor is all yours.
No, great. I mean, ask away. I mean, as Joe said, I've been thinking and working on test automation for API specifically for a long time. So hopefully, some of my experience comes across. I can share whatever I know, and happy to just kick things off here. So let me show you. Let me bring up a couple of slides to set some context, and I'll get straight into demos and,
Awesome.
and show you exactly how API testing in karate looks like. Right. And yes, karate has been around for a long time, 6 years to be precise, and it does a fair amount of stuff. It started out just doing API testing, but as you see on the top of the slide, karate does API mocking, API performance testing, and I'll show you a demo of API performance testing in this session. Also does UI automation. So in case you're interested and wondering if karate can actually compete with Selenium and Cypress and the usual suspects, the answer is yes. I'd like to talk about the top differentiators for a little bit. Now, when it comes to testing, to me, assertions are the big deal. That's your main responsibility as someone who's testing something, doing assertions. And karate makes the business of assertions on specifically JSON really easy. So I'll show you a bit of demo, and you'll get a feel of what assertions and reports of those assertions look like. And of course, when you have testing, you need reports. Karate is very carefully designed to do workflows. I'll show you examples in a moment, but testing just one API at a time is not good enough. You have to simulate how your end users actually traverse through your APIs. That's really important. And a good API test would actually be a whole sequence of calls where you chain data from one response into the next request. So that's about workflows. Data-driven testing, of course, is something not many tools make easy. Karate has spent a lot of time trying to make that easy for you, so you'll get a sense of that. Karate is actually very scriptable. So things like parameterization using CSV, using even data from a database is actually quite easy. And parallel execution, surprisingly, a lot of the tools out there don't do a good job, in my opinion. So it was something that on day one, specific effort went into karate to get that right. Because karate supports this unique way of doing Java interop, you can actually do things like, yes, there's a lot of talk nowadays about event-driven systems. You may have Kafka, you may have message queues, WebSockets in the mix, maybe webhooks where you have callbacks. These kind of complex, exotic scenarios are actually quite easy to handle with karate once you write a little bit of glue Java code. So that's that. I will show you a demo of how karate is able to actually reuse performance tests, reuse actually a functional regression test as a performance test, which is really, really cool. You can imagine how much time you can actually save. You don't need to rewrite your flows and yet another tool and so on. And one of the nice things about karate, which we keep hearing very good feedback from all across the world, is the fact that it's easy, it's simple, tests are super readable, and we have many cases where product owners, even folks who are not good at programming are actually able to quickly get into karate and do testing, proper API testing. Now, one of the themes of today's session is, right, should you be doing more API testing? And I think the answer is pretty clear, at least from my perspective. But this picture, I'm trying to give you a sense of the difference. On the left, you have the typical UI automation stack, right, which includes things like a driver. You have that whole HTML, JavaScript browser combination. It's a lot of moving parts. And the point here is that when you compare what API testing is, API testing actually kind of bypasses your entire front end stack, directly hits your backend services, gets the results back, and then does validations. Now, there are many, you can get a sense in this picture as to why API testing is a lot simpler, less flaky for certain, and a lot more easier actually, which may be counterintuitive. And this is some of the things that we are trying to actually spread awareness from Karate Labs, which is, I think there are misconceptions that API testing is hard, very low level. You need to really know a lot of technologies in order to be able to do it successfully. And we strongly feel that's not the case. It's actually quite simple once you have a tool that actually supports you to do it well. And on the left, you see there's a whole myriad of technologies that you need to be aware of, right? Like XPath, locators, the DOM, JavaScript, asynchronous operations on the DOM. You need to know how to handle iframes, for example, switch multiple tabs, window resize. The list goes on, and you get the sense that UI testing, and I'm sure a lot of folks on the session today are going to agree with me that it's not easy. It's pretty hard. They are certainly not stable. They have a reputation for being flaky. And I've seen so many teams, too many teams, in fact, that simply fail to keep up with the pace of development. It's a common problem that the UI automation lags behind the pace of development of the screens and so on. And API testing is an awesome antidote to all those problems. Now, we're not saying that you can completely do away with UI automation, right? In fact, there are many applications where it's very important that a user be able to do functionality through the front end, or there's no deal. But if you think carefully about your test strategy, we are pretty confident that you can actually move a large bulk of your testing, at least the backend business logic, to API testing, and then have maybe sanity checks or smoke tests for UI automation. And I'm sure some of you advocate and have heard of the testing pyramid. So it's pretty much aligned with that. Before I get into a demo, I just want to give you a sense of what to expect in a Karate test. And we're now focusing on just API testing using Karate. Okay. And I think the first thing that should strike you when you see this code, which is a simple hello world example of a Karate test, is this is not any of the programming languages that you may be used to. It's not Java, it's not JavaScript, Python, Ruby, and so on. It's this interesting mix of keywords. And I'm sure a lot of you already who have seen the slide or who are familiar with Cucumber know that the words in red given when then are the BDD keywords popularized by Cucumber. And I do want to make something very clear here, because it's a very common misconception when people come into Karate for the first time. Karate is not a BDD framework at all. It does not, claim or pretend to, solve for behavior-driven development and collaborating with your users before code has been written, and so on. You should think of Karate as more like a real scripting programming language, but the twist here is that Karate is really simple. And Karate has a few things specifically designed to make the business of API testing easy. For example, JSON is native to the syntax, which means you see you can express JSON, which is the large bulk of all API data. You can express JSON directly in your tests. It's lenient JSON. You don't need double quotes, which is great because you save a lot of keystrokes. You don't need quotes around the keys, for example. And this is exactly how JavaScript developers actually deal with JSON. And some of you would know that if you try to express JSON in Java, for example, you will have to do backslash, double quote, and escape all those quotes. You don't have that happening here, which is kind of a nice, elegant thing. Now, why do we call Karate a DSL, or a domain-specific language? It's because it has these keywords very carefully crafted to do things related to REST and HTTP. And let me call your attention to the second word on each line on the slide: URL request, method, status, and path. And these keywords should immediately make sense to anyone who's familiar with HTTP or REST. And Karate tests, as you can see here, read very nicely. There's less noise, less clutter, no semicolons and all that. And the match keyword of karate is where all the assertions happen. And as I said, assertions are a big deal. I keep talking about assertions and I bore people to death sometimes by talking about this. But the most important responsibility you have when you write any kind of test is to actually validate that the data or something has happened as expected. Now, when it comes to API testing, there are a few challenges. One, that you can have things like dynamic data come back, UUIDs, timestamps, and random kind of data. And you see this hash not null thing going on in the Karate syntax. And what's happening here is that we can actually validate all the data, like the name. We're going to check that the name is exactly equal to Billy here. But we say that, you know what, we want an ID, but we don't, it just needs to be not null, right? So to summarize, Karate is really good at doing deep equality checks on very large JSONs, although this is the Hello World example. And you can validate all the data, and you can ignore the troublesome data, as I talked about, which is not predictable. And last but not the least on the slide, chaining is something I talked about, right? Which is the whole workflows aspect of karate that we talked about. And this test, it's quite simple, but we begin to make a second API call in the last 3 lines of the script. And you see that the response, which happens to be a magic variable, the moment you make a request, you get a response. And you can now start elegantly picking data, like we say response.id. We pick that data out of the JSON that came back, and we use that as actually a path for the next request, and it just works. So we make actually 2 calls, and Karate is really, really good at, a good Karate test, as I said, would actually be like a post, get, maybe an update, a put, do a delete, and then check for a 404 at the end. And those are the kind of tests that I recommend you start getting into. So with that, let me show you a quick demo, right? And what you see here is the Visual Studio Code support that Karate has. In fact, if you install this extension in Visual Studio Code, everything comes out of the box. It's our recommended way for those who, especially if you don't have much programming experience, all you need to do is go to the Visual Studio Code marketplace, look for the Karate plugin. So this is how we search for it, and make sure that you pick the Karate plugin that has the round logo. That's the official one from Karate Labs. And it includes everything. You don't need to install Java or download any jars. The moment you have written a feature file, you see the convenient options to run this file and this test rather. And I'm going to click run. We're actually going to see a real live example of a Karate test. We're going to actually this URL, which is an internet URL, make those 2 calls. This test is very similar to the slide that I was showing you. And we have a report.
Really quick. Someone wants to know in the chat, can this be implemented in the pipeline?
Absolutely. So hang on. In a later demo, I'm actually going to do command line operations, which should be the answer to you that yes, absolutely. Everything of Karate runs headless on the command line, easy to hook into Jenkins and GitHub Actions and so on. Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you.
And once you run a test, you can open a link again, a 1 click to get the HTML report. And for those of you who don't know Karate, one of the selling points of Karate actually is that, first of all, the HTML reports come out of the box, but in the HTML report, you actually get the HTTP traffic inline. And this works even if you run a test in parallel. So, it's kind of, evolved obviously over a long period of time, and a lot of feedback from the community has gone into it. Now, before I move on, I just want to show you this quick demo of what happens if a Karate test fails. So I'm going to just simulate the assertion mismatch here. I'm going to fail this assertion, rerun this test. And this is the true test of a good test automation framework, right? You are going to get those dreaded red bills in your CI/CD and Jenkins ever so often, perhaps. And of course, Karate does give you a fair amount of diagnostics on the console. But let me show you the report. If I reload this report, okay, we see that, okay, something has turned red. Yes, there's a failure. But the nice thing about Karate is that even if you may be having a very complex JSON, Karate does its best to actually give you a very good visualization of what exactly went wrong, which value actually had a difference in expected result, and so on. So yes, Karate really makes it easy for you to actually, once you have a failure, to figure out what went wrong. And we've seen people really happy with the turnaround time, right? How fast, how fast can you actually fix a broken test automation suite? And Karate actually shines a lot in that regard. Okay, so the next demo I'll show you, and this is where I'm going to actually show you the command line part of Karate. But let me introduce this application that I'm going to use. I'm going to start a web application on the command line. And if I open my browser to localhost, some of you may be familiar with it. It's one of those typical applications used to compare JavaScript frameworks and so on. Okay. So this is the front end. There is a backend. So there's a bunch of APIs. And what I'm going to do is actually run an API test against this application. And now for a change, I'm actually showing you the IntelliJ support that we have from Karate Labs. This is IntelliJ with full Karate support, syntax highlighting, and all that. I'm going to run this feature. And yes, you get the same report experience and so on, right? This, by the way, is a very good test where we actually had this full cycle. We had a post, get, post, get, and at the end, we actually get 2 items, saved in a database kind of a scenario. But so keep in mind that I just ran a Karate test against this application that I'm testing. And if I now refresh the front end, which I just showed you, it would have 2 entries, right? The first and second items are what we actually added through an API. Okay. By the way, what I just showed you is kind of setting up, giving you some thoughts on hybrid testing, right? Setting up data via an API is a great way to set up a UI automation test. And keep in mind that Karate is one of the few frameworks that actually allows you to do both API testing and UI testing in the same test script, pretty much in the same flow. And we see many teams actually make use of this hybrid testing, and it's totally recommended. So now let me delete these. You've seen the effect of one Karate test. Okay. What I'm going to show you is taking that one test and multiplying it by 10. Okay. And what I'm going to show you is this demo of using Karate to run a performance test. We're just pointing to that simple feature, which is what we just ran. So we are going to multiply it by 10 users. We can define a ramp up and all the stuff. If you are familiar with performance testing and all that. Behind the scenes, we delegate to Gatling. So all you need to write from a Gatling point of view is just 2 things. Which feature in Karate, which test are we planning to run? And of course, your multiplication factor, your load model. And I'm going to do it on the command line. So now the answer to the question, right? How do you run Karate on the command line? It's simple. Karate behind the scenes typically is a Maven project, or is a Maven dependency in a Java project, or a Gradle dependency, or it can be a standalone jar, which is a binary. So Karate is very easy to include into any pipeline. A Docker is one of the ways, obviously, in which you can actually get Karate into your CI/CD pipeline. Okay, so I'm going to run a test. If you see on the right, I'm going to hit enter, and you can actually watch the effect of the performance test by seeing the log behavior on the left screen, right? You're seeing all those 10 users ramp up and start hitting. The test ended very very quickly because I just asked for 10 users. And if I refresh the front end as proof that we actually ran this performance test successfully with 2 items into 10 users, we have 20 items added to the database, which again, food for thought, because APIs are again a great way for you to pump data into some system. And you would typically need to do such things, for the cost, for the greater good of testing, architectures and soap tests and so on. And let me finally show you the report that you get after we ran the Karate test using behind the scenes, as I said, we delegate to Gatling. So there it is. The Gatling report is actually a thing of beauty. Gives you all the details as to which APIs were invoked during this test, how many times, and what was the average time on each. So that was a lot, and I'm happy to take any questions on this right now and then move ahead.
Awesome. So if you have a question specifically to the demo so far, let us know in the chat. Peter, someone asked, I know the question's yes, but maybe you can expand on it. Does it work with SOAP web services with XML payloads?
Absolutely. In fact, Karate has good support for XML. You can do XPath assertions in XML. Short answer, absolutely. There are many teams. It actually surprised me, to be honest, something I didn't expect when I created Karate. There happens to be a lot of legacy projects out there, maybe not so surprisingly, that are completely XML SOAP based, and people use Karate for that quite successfully.
I know with the example you just showed for performance testing, a lot of people struggle with things like JMeter. How hard was it to integrate with Gatling? I know Gatling uses Scala, and sometimes people are kind of scared of using it. Is that difficult to do in Karate?
It's a great point. And if I bring back the example, okay, what I'm showing you right now is the Scala part. Yes, you're right, Joe. If you want to use Gatling, you need to write Scala, although there's a twist, and I'll come to that in a moment. And Scala, yes, is definitely not it's a very hard language. I'll be very honest. I've tried Scala, not something I enjoyed doing, to be very honest. The good news is that because Karate, right, Karate has taken all the complexity out, right? All the hard business of you having to make these API requests is now moved to Karate. It's Karate's responsibility. And the only thing that you need to get right in your Scala file, which is actually boilerplate, you can pretty much cut and paste this once you know what to cut and paste. It's this one line that, as I said, is the 10 users, which is your load multiplication factor. And the only other thing you need to do is point to your Karate feature file, and you don't need to do anything else. There is this minor detail of having some patterns defined, which is explained in the documentation. But short answer to your question, Joe, you need to use, although Scala is needed for you to use this mix of Karate and Gatling, we've taken most of the complexity out. And one of the things on our roadmap, because I know some of you in the audience would be aware that Gatling has released Java support. It's been around for around 6 months, I think. We are planning to add that to Karate, which means good news, right? You just need to stick to Java and you can get your performance tests done.
Great. Someone asks also about, I forgot what it was now, it went away. Do you do scenario outlines? I think a lot of people, when they see that syntax, get confused, and you addressed it fairly well. It's not meant as a collaboration front end like BDD. It's just a syntax you can use in an English-like way to create automated tests. But can you use the other things like a scenario or outlines that you normally would with Cucumber type things? Syntax?
Yes, absolutely yes. I do have some examples like this one.
There it is.
In fact,
Perfect.
Yeah, in fact, this is probably the best example. If I run this is just going to do a normal loop over those scenarios, and actually explode the test into 2 scenarios. So the answer is yes. That said, for those of you who are wondering, what is this weird way of doing example? If you're familiar with Cucumber, it's all in the documentation, but you can do something called a dynamic scenario outline that you can For example, this is an interesting test where we set up data in one scenario. And what this means is that you can actually use things like a database on the fly to generate your table, right? Which is very cool. It's one of the things that people in the world of Cucumber, ask for a lot, because Cucumber restricts you, right? You have to hard code the table, and then once that scenario outline and the examples are there, you're stuck with that. Yeah, it's kind of simple, but yeah, some people want the power.
Awesome. Is there a way to customize the Gatling report you showed? Accumulate the response metrics based on the API method?
In fact, it does it by default. If you notice, I had those 3 APIs that finally surfaced in the Gatling report. But short answer is yes, if you want finer control. And for example, GraphQL is very tricky, because for those of you who know GraphQL, everything is just this one post to this one gigantic endpoint that has all your queries under it. And you'll need to do things like tweak. You have to tell Gatling a little more information, saying, okay, these are the buckets in which I want to partition the various API patterns involved in my test. You can do that. It's in the documentation. So short answer is yes, you can control that if you want to.
Nice. And you just mentioned this, so I'm just going to throw out this question someone already asked, and that is, they want to know, not that one. They want to know, can you use Karate to check GraphQL responses? And it sounded like the answer was yes.
Yes. In fact, we were doing it. There are many companies you can find blogs written. Trivago comes to mind, and Expedia comes to mind. A short answer is yes, because GraphQL, the responses are JSON, right? The requests are a little more tricky. The requests are this GQL, which is not JSON, but it's text. So since Karate handles plain text really well, both from request and response perspectives, it really works well. And let me say this, one of the challenges with GraphQL is that when you make a GraphQL request, the response can be anything, right? You're pretty much writing a query on the fly. And what this means is that when you get a response back in the world of GraphQL, you can't fix a schema for it. It's highly dynamic. It just completely depends on the query that you send. And what this means is that in the old days, right, if you use frameworks like Rest Assured and so on, you'll need to write these POJOs or Java objects to represent all your payloads. You don't have that problem with Karate, because you're working directly in JSON, and you can just write any JSON that you expect, put it in your test, and it just works. So I just wanted to make this point that Karate is actually well suited for GraphQL, which is what we strongly believe.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think those are all the questions that relate to maybe a demo type piece. I don't know if you want to continue or want to take other Q&A or look at the first poll to see where people are at right now.
Yeah, let's do a poll. Yes.
Right. So it's like Choose Your Adventure Guild. So let us know what you're looking for, and Peter and Kapil are going to deliver. So this first question was, what is your least favorite part of test automation? Obviously, the number one part is maintenance effort. And the other 2 are tied when you realize you missed a bug while writing test automation code. So that's a pretty big percentage, 52%. So how does Karate help with the maintenance effort, I guess, would be a good follow-up question for that.
As I said, Karate tests happen to be kind of easy to read. And I gave you a sense of how easy it is to read the troubleshooting information, once you run a test. While we are there, let me, in terms of another demo that I think is useful, I think a lot of you in the API testing space would be familiar with this. The RESTful Booker application is pretty useful. It's this live API that simulates a hotel booking use case. And I'm going to run this one test. And if I quickly scroll down, this test is actually pretty comprehensive. It does a bunch of actions. And I want you to actually take a look at the report. And it's running, it's actually hitting this RESTful Booker endpoint. Now, if you look at the report, one thing that I wanted to call out is that, and this relates to the question that some of you were asking, right? may be on your mind, right? How does karate relate to Cucumber? And can you maintain these tests? When you look at a test, to me, Joe, right, the big test of is this maintainable is that when you eyeball this test, does it make sense? Can you quickly figure out what's going on? Where did the API calls actually happen? What is the business scenario, which I believe is clear, because if you use comments in your source code or in your test script judiciously, you pretty much, I would claim, approach or even go beyond what Cucumber allows you to do, which is a test report that actually you can give to one of your stakeholders in your project, and they can actually read this and say, okay, that's what's happening. We're doing a trade booking. That's the payload that we send. And then we needed to get the booking by a particular combination of parameters, and it worked like that, and so on. And I showed you a demo where if a test failed, you know exactly which line failed. All that surfaces in the report with color coding and visual hints pretty nicely. So yeah, that's a lot, and hopefully if you put all what I just said together, it gives you hopefully a case for karate tests are quite maintainable, and we hear that all the time.
Readability goes a long way. I don't know if people realize it may seem like it's nothing, but when you have thousands of tests, if you can't read them or read the results or the output, you're in trouble because the next build is on its way. So I definitely agree with that, making it readable. How easy is it to share that with the team, though? Do you share a URL, or is it on a server where people can access that report?
The most typical case, Joe, is that these tests would be run in your CI/CD pipeline, let's say
Right.
Jenkins.
Yeah, yep.
And yeah, so that Jenkins has plugins for Cucumber reports or just JUnit style reports. So yeah, you pretty much go to your build URL and the reports would be hanging off that. Absolutely.
Nice. All right. Peter, just said you had another demo. Just set some context. I started the second poll. I'm kind of interested by this. I said, what do you think is easier? 80% said API testing. And UI testing is harder. So curious. I guess it depends. I guess if you're in a microservice world, I don't know how you know where all the dependencies are. That gets kind of complicated. But I could see how UI testing definitely could be easier or is harder to make, I guess, more maintainable or more less flaky, maybe. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Oh yeah, I mean, that poll result is music to my ears. So I feel it's great. People are aware because I'll tell you why. Right? There's so much of chatter on various forums, and one thing that kind of upsets me once in a while is that all the discussions seem to revolve around UI test automation. There's a lot of obsession with selectors and all those things. And I'm feeling like left out. Hey, why don't more people speak about API testing? So that's where I'm coming from. So I'm kind of glad that people realize that API testing is easier, and hopefully, one of the things I'm trying to convince teams is that it's not just easier; it just makes sense because it's less flaky and all that, and you can actually get the ROI that so many teams really worry about when it comes to test automation. You probably get more ROI with API testing. And if you have a strategy that has more API tests and then you have some UI tests, because I'm not saying, as I said again, you would probably need UI tests if your user interface is critical to your business. So now, yeah, that said, since we're on the topic of UI automation, let me get into a UI automation test, and then that might be interesting. We can actually look at a small comparison of, and this might be a surprise to some folks out there, because I know there's a lot of folks that, think of karate as just doing API test automation. So guess what? Karate does UI test automation. What you're looking at here is a simple UI automation test. So I'm going to talk you through what's going to happen. Okay, we're going to try to log into GitHub in a browser, and we're going to plug in a login and a password that don't work, and we actually validate and see. It's me again, like a broken record, telling you that you should do assertions in your test. If you don't do assertions, you're probably not writing good tests. So we actually assert for the error message. We do a screenshot, so I'll show you what the screenshot looks like in the report in a moment. And then in the second part of the test, we actually go to google.com, search for Karate DSL, and validate whether this we actually land on the Karate Labs URL. And you should note, Karate has a lot of things like wait functions built in, and I'm sure the moment I said wait, a lot of your alarm bells went off in your heads, right? Because waiting is one of the most troublesome things in the world of UI automation. In fact, I would rate that as the number one problem if that you need to solve when you write UI automation tests. And just something for you to look out for when you go to the documentation for Karate's UI testing capabilities. A lot of thought has gone into how Karate handles weights. It's really cool in my opinion. So check that out. I'm just going to run this test. So completely hands-free. Yeah, that's Chrome. That's the GitHub login. That's the Karate DSL Google search. And that was pretty quick, right? And in case you're wondering, behind the scenes, we used Chrome. Some of you may be familiar with the CDP or the Chrome Developer Protocol, the Chrome DevTools Protocol, I'm sorry. And there you go. And we can, Karate, by the way, supports the WebDriver protocol. So we could do this, and Karate would then use a different mechanism to connect to the browser. It would actually use the whole W3C Selenium protocol. And this is important to call out because in case, for example, you're a team that wants to use something like Sauce Labs or Browser Stack or Lambda Test to run your tests in the cloud, Karate handles that beautifully. We have many of our enterprise clients actually doing that. Yeah, and here's the last demo I wanted to show you, which is pretty cool. What I'm going to do is rerun this test in debug mode. You see this debug option here at the top. So when I click debug, this test is going to come up, but it stops right there. Right? You see that line highlighted. And what I'm going to do is something interesting, right? What we have done from a test automation point of view is pretty interesting, which is we have paused the browser, which means you can, of course, look at the developer tools, which is what most of you would want to do in this situation. But what I'm going to do is if you follow my typing at the bottom left of the screen, and I say highlight all input, you can see that we can actually now interact with the screen while it is frozen. And this is really, really important or really useful because you can actually now start trying out different ways of locating your elements, which most of you know is one of the, again, tricky things about UI test automation. So let me demonstrate the login field specifically being highlighted by grabbing it by ID. There it is, that worked. And in case you were wondering, this debug mechanism that you're seeing built into our Visual Studio Code and IntelliJ plugins work for API tests. So in case you had this large API test and you wanted to really stop it and debug it, this is a great thing to have. Now, there's one more thing I need to show you, which is really, really cool, which is you can actually go back in time. And if I hit this step back button, okay, I can actually replay the test without stopping it.
Oh, that's cool.
And even better, and what I'm going to do is earlier you would have noticed it was using XXX. Let me just change that to something like this. And if I hit this button, it's actually going to say hot reload. And guess what's going to happen if I now continue to play this test forward? It actually takes the new data. So we have actually successfully, we've done two things, which is pretty cool. We actually were able to go back in a debug session, and we were able to edit your test data on the fly without restarting. And I'm sure you understand, why this is a big deal. If you had this large test where you're struggling at the end, getting something right, you don't need to go all the way and restart and spend time doing those time-consuming login kind of flows. Just fix your tests right there. This is like trying to fix a car engine while the car engine is running, that kind of thing, which is kind of a cool thing to do. So yes, I thought some of you would like this demo because it's kind of a demonstration of some of the advanced things Karate is doing behind the scenes to do UI automation. So that was all the demos we had actually.
Yeah, that was actually one of the questions someone had was how easy is it to debug? And it actually was one of my pet peeves. I used to, in WinRunner and QTP, be able to do breakpoints and interact with the browser. And then I went to Selenium and I lost all that. It was very difficult to set it up. Even QTP and WinRunner didn't have that like go back in time type of functionality. So very, very cool. I'm really impressed with that.
Yeah, and if I were to add, I can't help saying this. Well, number one, going back is something you can't do in normal languages like JavaScript and Python, Ruby, all the usual suspects. And speaking of JavaScript, and I'm going to plant this seed into your minds, right? Especially those of you who are probably fans of Playwright and Cypress and JavaScript-based frameworks like Nightwatch and all that.
Yeah.
One of the things about a JavaScript approach to test automation is that you need to be really good at things like async, await, and promises, right? Everything is a callback in the world of JavaScript. And even experienced programmers like me get it wrong sometimes, right? And what I'm trying to say here is that when you are doing test automation using JavaScript or TypeScript, you need to be a really good JavaScript programmer. And it's really complex when you are trying to test user interfaces, because everything in a user interface is async, await, and promises based, right? You have to chain things in kind of weird ways to get tests to work. And if you don't chain things at the right place, things stop working. The reason I said all of this is obviously Karate has got a very simple approach. You just write lines of actions like click and assert and all that, and it runs exactly in sequence, no complication, no fuss. And as you saw, right, you can actually step back and debug it. You can go forward linearly and it goes backwards linearly, which I think is an advantage we have. And it just means that you can get a lot done using Karate, even if you have a team that's not really good at programming and automation, which we are seeing. This actually brings folks like the domain experts in any team or any organization, Joe, right? We're seeing a lot of folks come to us and say, you know what, I didn't really know programming and I didn't really know automation, but because of Karate, I was able to actually be productive, contribute, and actually sit side by side with my development peer on the team and actually get stuff done. And that's something very powerful, and I really wanted to call that out, Joe.
I mean, this is not the Joe show, but I can go off on a tangent on this as well. This is a beautiful point. Someone just asked in the comment as well, can I use Cypress to do API testing? Well, yeah, but like just as Peter mentioned, you're going to need to know JavaScript. I guess you need to use the right tool for the right team. If someone's developers, maybe they use Cypress. But like you said, a lot of testers, it's hard to find a tester that knows testing and is a JavaScript expert, right? And then they get lost in programming and not necessarily testing. So using a tool like Karate, I think really simplifies and allows you to be a tester and still get the benefits of automation without being maybe a master programmer, for sure. Love it. So another quick poll before I get into some questions, because I'm really curious to dive into the future and history of Karate. Like I said, I've been following you all for a while. I know you have some exciting news, and Kapil has some things I'm sure he's going to want to share. So I just want to get to one quick poll here before we dive into a few more questions. What is needed more in API testing today? Most people said coverage. And then the two that were tied were maintaining tests, recorded play, and then assertions was below that. So I don't know, Peter, any thoughts on this? Karate focuses on coverage or anything like that to help with this?
This is great because, to be very honest, one of the things in our immediate roadmap is to solve for API test coverage. We're still working on that. So if any one of you has any thoughts on how it has to look like, do reach out to, how to find us, reach out to us. But yes, in theory, when you run a Karate suite, Karate has all the information about every single endpoint and API pattern that was invoked. And it should be easy for us to actually give you this map of all the APIs that you happened to invoke as part of your test. And once you have that, you can imagine it's going to be quite simple for you to kind of cross-reference and map that to maybe a master list of APIs maybe coming from a Swagger or an Open API spec. So we could give you that whole coverage, not just coverage, we could actually give you this visualization of, okay, I've covered these APIs, but I've yet to cover these APIs. And that's obviously what teams want. Something we are thinking very hard about. So it's good to see that reflected in this poll, Joe.
Awesome. All right. So I thought before we get to some questions, I just want to set the stage here. And I want to bring Kapil into the conversation. And I guess the big announcement, really, if people haven't known, I know it happened in 2021. I know how people are aware. Karate has been open source. It is open source. You've been adding to it, constantly improving it. But you also announced recently Karate Lab. So what I'm always impressed by is entrepreneurship in the testing space. So people that start off doing open source and then they actually can make a business and a living out of it. And what's great about it is because you're creating tools now, but from a tester's mindset, because you actually have been hands-on for years and working in the open source. So maybe a little bit about like what is Karate Labs? What is this all about? What's the story behind this? And Kapil, you're welcome to join in or start it off for us as well.
Okay, I'll start it off and Peter jump in. I think the beauty is Peter woke up one morning and accepted the fact that he's enjoying his time on karate more than his day job. He picked up the phone, called me and said, "Hey man, we need to join forces. I built this. I want to walk you through it." And the interesting thing is we have known each other professionally since the last 16 years, parted ways, became friends. We spent a good, I think, 9 or 10 days just focused on what Peter's built on karate. And we said, I was already independent by then. And we decided to join forces, incorporated Karate Labs in 2021. The audience will be hopefully impressed to know that we have 415 plus existing enterprise users of karate, of which 42 of the Fortune 500 companies are extensive users of karate. And in the last 16 months or so, we have met with, I think, close to 290 of our users. And there is a long way to go for us on that, Joe. So that is it. It's great that we are now full-time focused on scaling this wonderful product and solution that Peter has brought to the world. But again, Joe, as you know, converting an open source solution to a for-profit open source company is a journey, and I'm glad both of us have lost our hair, because if not, we would have lost it now.
So Peter, that's a good question. How much of this is open source that you showed today? Are people all excited and then like, oh no, it's enterprise, I have to pay for it? Alleviate some of those fears maybe?
So everything on GitHub, and I'm sure all of you can go to the GitHub page and look at all the code. It's MIT licensed. Everything you see on GitHub is open source, right? Now the plugins are not open source, and that's where we have a very serious mission at Karate Labs, and to make ourselves sustainable as an open source project. And going back to the conversation with Kapil, right? Yes, I was certainly having much more fun working on karate as an open source project than my day job. And obviously I had to make a decision, right? Do I dedicate my time to karate, or do I continue kind of giving it less attention? And one of the things that convinced me, right, when I spoke to Kapil and then we did this analysis of how many people are using karate, it was like I had been doing this year after year as kind of this passion project, on my own, of course, with a lot of help from contributors. But you wake up this one day and you see, my God, there's so many enterprises depending on karate, right? That have actually injected karate into their CI/CD pipelines and are trusting karate to actually give them, the green signal, whether something is ready to be shipped into production and all that. And that's a big responsibility. And I think that convinced both of us, you know what, man, I mean, this is something worth fighting for. We need to put everything we have, make this as successful as possible, set it up for success as far as possible. And hence, we have taken the strategy of the plugins, which are not open source, are freemium. So all of you can use the plugins for free. If you want some of the advanced features like debug, for example, that we showed today, that's a paid upgrade. And that's how we are structured the way forward. Kapil, you want to add anything?
Yes, please, Peter. Thanks. Joe, somebody's asked a question on Slido also about why is it that you release plugins and not a SaaS offering? If I may take around 2 minutes to just answer that
Great. Yeah,
and
that'd be
build
beautiful.
further on what
Yeah.
Peter shared. I think there are two aspects at play here. One is open source, and the second is becoming a profitable company.
Mhm.
And let me address both, Peter. Joe. Our primary focus is to keep our open source community's participation in trust. And for this, Joe, we need to be profitable. We need to ensure we make a profit to drive a balance between improving the open source code, seamless user onboarding, and providing community support. Now, if you go back into history, early generations of commercial open source startups, they monetized by providing managed support or offering paid enterprise features on top, the so-called open core model.
Hmm.
Now, this approach led to great success for companies like Red Hat, MongoDB, Elastic, etc. But if you see today, the increasingly common open source monetization strategy is deliver the first product as fully managed cloud service, which gives developers access to open source product minus the pain of complicated installations, configuration, and ongoing maintenance. So what did Karate Labs choose to do? We chose to develop and launch our official IntelliJ and Visual Studio plugin with the intent of frictionless onboarding, removing the pain of complicated installations, configuration, and ongoing maintenance. But more importantly, Joe, addressing any security concerns as karate is local force, which means when using karate, user data will never leave customer firewall. This, amongst the others that Peter showed as our top differentiators, has been a primary driver for companies to migrate from SaaS providers to karate. Now, if I break this up in numbers, our estimate is that today karate has approximately 340,000 plus active users. In the next 24 months, we want to cross to 1 million active users of karate open source. Now, Joe, our aspiration is that if we have just 2.7% of our active open source users as paying customers, that is adequate enough for us to continue ramping up our product engineering teams, setting up community support teams, customer onboarding teams. So if I say that again once more, nothing of Karate open source will be monetized. So much so, like Peter said, all of Karate open source core features are free within our plugins. And the option is with the individual developer or tester to upgrade to our premium features like debugging of tests, importing a Postman collection or open API spec and generating a karate test. But we also provide consulting, training, and enterprise support for our enterprise users. And finally, Joe, I would say is launching a premium plugin is not in of itself a monetization strategy. And you know this well enough.
Oh, yeah.
What is in the karate plugin that solves a pain point so intense that developers and testers who are used to using karate and leveraging karate open source anonymously and for free will be willing to register for an upgrade, pull out a credit card, or tell their enterprise procurement teams to sign an enterprise contract with Karate Lab. Now, that is the rub, Joe, that will define whether karate is an open source solution or a responsible for-profit open source company.
Absolutely. It's a hard thing to juggle, but for sure, to make open source sustainable, you need to, you have to go this route, and I think you're doing it the right way. So I appreciate that. I'm sure everyone here does as well. So thank you for that, Kapil. All right. So, like I said, I'm really excited when I see an entrepreneur actually come out in the testing space, and so I really want to see this succeed. So I'm great to see that it's grown leaps and bounds. We have about 2 more minutes left, Peter. We have a bunch of questions. I thought maybe we could do a quick lightning round and then maybe tie it all together to see. I don't know if you see anything in the slide that really catches your eye or your attention that you can answer quickly for the folks.
If you go to the documentation, there's a section and a big Excel sheet that has a detailed comparison with Karate and Rest Assured. So that's the first question. I'm saying this because, yes, if you are looking for data that you can take your leadership, we have a lot. I can't read. Okay,
Can we
test scenarios and
configure? Can we configure the latest extent report with Karate? Asking, yeah.
Yes. Again, short answer to that, because this is a lightning round. Do a search on Stack Overflow looking for Karate and Extent. You will find what you're looking for. Yes, you can combine several APIs, and I think I showed you a demo of that. So you can call different APIs on different servers. Absolutely. AI support for API testing, we are working on that. By the way, that said, we've got reports from users that GitHub Copilot really works well with Karate. So you can try that option. I've actually tried it and it surprised me. It's pretty good. Can this be implemented in pipelines? Absolutely. I think I showed you the command line and GitHub Actions and all that. Is it mandatory to have Karate plugin? Absolutely not. You can just use normal Java support in any IDE and integrate database assertion. Yes, one of the big selling points of Karate actually is that you can mix not just databases, message queues, ActiveMQ, gRPC, WebSockets, and so on. Yes. Jenkins with Karate, same answer as CI/CD. Absolutely. Share examples you have. Yeah, the examples, there are plenty of examples. Go to the Karate GitHub page. Just look for Karate-demo. Huge project, many examples. You'll have all you need. Test steps for reusability purposes. If you mean Cucumber step definition, the answer is strong no. There are reasons. Please contact me offline or search for that. And some people don't really understand Karate compared with Code, Script.js, Playwright. I already talked a bit about JavaScript. So Karate uses its own non-JavaScript syntax, which I think is simpler and much more powerful. But you should evaluate it, obviously. If you incorporate AML to make, in fact, I'll say this is a very strong statement to make. I believe Karate UI testing is so stable that you don't need AI. But I'm sure your mileage may vary.
Well, awesome lightning round. You're the first speaker to actually get the concept of a lightning round, Peter. So thank you for that. There's a bunch of other questions, but I want to respect everyone's time. We're a minute over. I guess any parting words of wisdoms or anything, maybe misunderstandings of Karate you want people to know before we end our session? Kapil, we'll start with you and wrap it up with you, Peter.
Yeah, just please try us out. It's like when you go to, if you go to Germany, all the Mercedes-Benz has a deal with all the taxi companies, Joe, where they cut a good deal, and all they tell the taxi drivers is just keep us telling what wear and tear and what issues you go through. Please try Karate and give us feedback. That's the only parting word.
And Peter, I'll just like to plug, we actually import in the plugins from Postman, from OpenAPI, from Swagger, from curl, and from HAR files. So in case that sounds interesting, you know where to reach us. We've seen teams actually drastically accelerate the creation of tests by just converting Postman collections, for example. So please look out for that.
Oh, yeah. Just remind me of just other tools. Like I know Postman, they're starting to charge for collections and things like that. So if you are looking for an alternative to like an API testing tool like Postman, definitely check out Karate, and people can learn more into this Learn More tab. So thank you, Kapil and Peter, for this awesome session, and really appreciate you and all you've been doing for the community over these years. So really look forward to seeing this take off. Thank you both.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Cheers.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks.